Thank you, sir. Russia called for this urgent meeting of the Security Council to discuss the aggressive actions of the United States and their allies against Syria. This is the fifth meeting on this topic just this week. The President of the Russian Federation, Putin, made a special statement today, and I will quote him. On the 14th of April, the United States, supported by its ally, launched an airstrike against military and civilian targets of the Syrian Arab Republic without a mandate from the United Nations Security Council and in violations of UN Charter and norms and principles of international law. An aggression against a sovereign state was carried out, which is on the front line in the fight against terrorism. Just as 1 year ago, when the Syria air base in Syria came under attack, the United States used as a pretext a staged chemical attack against civilians. This time in Duma, Damascus suburb. Now, Russian military experts did not find any traces of chlorine or any other toxic agents when they visited the site. Not a single local resident was able to confirm that a chemical attack had actually taken place. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons dispatched its experts to Syria in order to investigate all the circumstances. However, in a sign of cynical disdain, a group of Western countries decided to take military action without waiting for the results of the investigation. Russia condemns in the strongest possible terms the attack against Syria, where Russian military personnel are assisting the legitimate government in its counterterrorism efforts. Through its actions, the United States makes an already catastrophic humanitarian situation in Syria even worse and brings suffering to civilians. In fact, the U.S. panders to the terrorists who have been tormenting the Syrian people for 7 years, leading to a wave of refugees fleeing this country and the region. The current escalation around Syria is destructive for the entire system of international relations. History will deliver its verdict, and Washington already bears a heavy responsibility for the bloody outrage in Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Libya. End of quote. Russia has done everything possible to convince the United States and its allies to refrain from their military plans, which could lead to a new spiral of violence in Syria and destabilize the Middle East. The Secretary General of the UN, at the meeting of the Security Council that we convened yesterday and today, has expressed his concern about the way events have developed. However, in Washington, London, and Paris, preferred to disregard calls to appeals to common sense. The United States and its allies continue to demonstrate blatant disregard for international law. Although as permanent members of the Security Council, they must be especially firm in protecting the provisions of the UN Charter. It was shameful to hear how, in justifying the aggression, an article of the US Constitution was mentioned. Now we have the greatest respect to the right of each state to respect their own founding law. However, Washington should learn, it's time for Washington to learn that the International Code of Behavior regarding the use of force is regulated by the United Nations Charter. It's interesting how the people of Great Britain and France, what they will think that when they find out that their government is taking part in an illegal military adventure by referring to the American Constitution. You're constantly tempted by neocolonialism. You have nothing but disdain for the UN Charter and the Security Council, which you are unjustifiably trying to use for your illicit aims. There's no serious work that you're doing in the Security Council. You don't consult us, and you mendaciously claim otherwise. You undermine the authority of the Security Council. As a pretext for aggression, you mention the alleged use of chemical weapons in the Syrian city of Duma. Representatives of Russia, after an inspection by our experts, unequivocally stated that no such incident took place. Furthermore, there were people found who took part in this staging. And in fact, the inspirers and organizers of that staging were foreign intelligence services. After this event, the Syrian authorities immediately invited experts from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons so that they conduct a field mission to Duma in order to establish the facts. Quickly, visa formalities were resolved and guarantees of security were provided. At the time the strikes were conducted, experts were already in Syria and getting ready to begin their work. I want to recall to the members of the Security Council and everyone else that on the 10th of April, when our draft resolution on the secure work of the special mission of the OPCW was blocked, we were assured of the fact that such a document was not necessary. We were told that the mission, without any additional efforts by the Security Council, will go visit the site and conduct an investigation of the chemical incident. Now it is clear that we were absolutely right. Yesterday, some of our colleagues, some of them naively, some of them cynically, told us that the reason of the situation is supposedly a lack of an independent investigative mechanism. The aggression has shown that that is not the issue at all, as we stated. During last year's attack against the Shayrat air base, there was the joint investigative mechanism of the UN OPCW that did not prevent the United States from conducting a missile strike. Afterwards, the JIM, in fact, made sure that its conclusions coincided with the reasons for the American strike. We have said many times, you don't need any investigations. You didn't need them then, and you don't need them today. The organizers of the aggression didn't even wait for the elementary establishment of facts by an international organization which is authorized to do that. They supposedly determined everything for themselves and determined who was guilty. After, given that they themselves, with the fighters that were under their control and NGOs that they control, they disseminated all kinds of rumors using social media. They confirmed this through so-called secret intelligence. Mythical secret intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, the masks, or rather white helmets, have once again fallen. We are already used to the fact that when they conduct their doubtful geopolitical policies, the countries that are aggressors already blame the regime of Assad. Lately, they tend to shift responsibility on Russia, which, according to their interpretation, cannot control the dictator. All this is based on a scheme that is that has been well tried. There's a provocation, there's mendacious accusations, a verdict, and punishment. This is how you want international affairs to be conducted now? This is hooliganism in international relations and not minor hooliganism, given that we're talking about major nuclear powers. Several strikes were conducted against the Scientific Research Center in Barza and Jamraya. Recently, 2 inspections by the OPCW were conducted with unimpeded access to all facilities. Experts didn't find any traces of activity that would contravene the Chemical Weapons Convention. The scientific facilities in Syria are used only for peaceful activity, which is aimed at enhancing the effectiveness of economic activity of Syria. You want Syria to have no economy at all? You want to throw this country back into the Stone Age? Just a few years ago, this country was one of the most developed countries in the Middle East. You want to finish off what your sanctions haven't achieved yet. At the same time, you are shedding crocodile tears about the suffering of ordinary Syrians. Well, ordinary Syrians who are tired of war and who are happy that their legitimate authorities have freed their territory are not. You're not interested in their suffering. Your aggressive actions contribute to worsening the humanitarian situation, which you are so worried about, according to your statements. In 24 hours, you could stop the conflict in Syria. For this, Washington, London, and Paris only have to give orders to their hand-picked terrorists to stop their fighting against the legitimate authorities and against their own people. The strikes were conducted against Syrian military airfields, which are being used in the course of an operation against terrorist organizations. It's quite an original contribution to the combat against international terrorism, as Washington keeps repeating, which, as Washington keeps repeating, is the only goal of its military presence in Syria. We have serious doubts about that. It seems that it is clear that those in the West who cover themselves with humanitarian rhetoric are trying to justify their action in Syria by supposedly to defeat the jihadists, are actually aiming at dividing, dismembering the country. This is confirmed by the fact that the United States has refused to take part in rebuilding the areas of Syria that have been freed from the jihadists. Lastly, your aggression is a major strike and threat against the possibility of continuing the political process under the UN auspices, which, in spite of objective difficulties, was moving forward at varying speeds. So, what were your constant references to the Geneva process worth if you yourselves, using your own actions, are destroying that process? We call on the United States and its allies to immediately end the aggressive actions against Syria and to refrain from them in the future.